Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David Ige.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.
Aloha. Thanks for joining us here on Spotlight Hawaii on this Wednesday morning. I'm Yanji Denise, joined by Ryan Kalei Suji here on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. And Ryan, today we are heading to the 5th floor of the Hawaii State Capitol.
That's right. We welcome in Governor David Ige back to the show. Governor, great to see you. It's been some time, but thanks so much for spending your morning with us this morning.
Absolutely. Thanks, Yanji. Thanks, Ryan. I look forward to these opportunities to talk story.
Well, we look forward to them as well. Before we get to some of the issues, wanted to get your thoughts on what happened on Saturday night with the primary election. A lot of seats up for grab, including your seat for governor. Your thoughts about what happened in the election overall?
Ryan, I think there were no real big surprises in the election. I was personally disappointed in the overall turnout. It definitely, it ended up being about 100,000 votes less than the primary 2 years ago. We all know that during presidential elections, turnout is higher, but I was surprised. It's an all mail-in ballot. Again, everyone has the ballot. It's just a matter of filling it out and submitting it. And the actual votes cast were significantly below where they were 2 years ago. I'm glad that the negative attack ads that were sponsored by PRP were not successful. My experience has been that Hawaii generally doesn't like those attacks. They oftentimes are not founded in any real significant factual basis. And, I'm glad that Hawaii voters continue to recognize that. And it didn't seem to have any significant impact on the final outcomes.
I'm interested because there's a conversation happening about, whether or not the governor should be able to choose his or her own lieutenant governor. Right now, the voters get to make that choice. What do you think about that? Do you think going forward, it would be wise to have the governor pick his or her own lieutenant governor?
Yanji, that issue has been in front of the legislature for like decades. And, I do think that, from the voter perspective, I think the voter wants to be able to cast their ballot for who should be lieutenant governor. And as you know, many lieutenant governors do go on to become governor. And so when it has been presented in both the legislature, I don't know if it's ever been put on the ballot to have the voters decide. But the voters want to have a say in who should be lieutenant governor. And, I think to change that would be a monumental task.
Speaking of a lieutenant governor that wants to be governor, your lieutenant governor, Josh Green, won the Democratic nomination and will be representing the party in that race for governor. You've worked with Josh Green for some time now in the Senate. He was part of your Chess Club Alliance back in those days. Of course, later he would fill the role of lieutenant governor. How would you describe working with Josh Green overall, and just your thoughts about him, potentially moving into the seat that you currently occupy?
Well, Josh works hard. He's a passionate individual. In the Senate, he definitely worked on healthcare issues as a doctor, chairing the Committee on Health, and always focused on those health-related issues. I think he ran a good campaign, and we do expect that it'll be a challenge in the general. But obviously, I would like to see the Democrat prevail in this election.
And a similar question about Sylvia Luke and your thoughts about her. You've worked with her, obviously, over the decades. What do you think she will bring to the lieutenant governor's office?
Sylvia has been really focused on getting things done. As once I became governor, I worked with her on the homeless challenge, and she's been pretty focused on being helpful. I think that's bodes well. She obviously has a wealth of knowledge, serving as finance chair for 10 years almost. Certainly, she understands state government and state operations, and really would be a valuable asset, I think, should they work and prevail in the general election.
Let's move on to some of the issues that you continue to deal with. Of course, COVID-19 continues to be something that you monitor and track. There are some changes with federal funding that will impact certain individuals as we continue to deal with the pandemic and COVID-19 overall. Your thoughts of where we are right now as a state and some of those changes and how they may impact Hawaii residents.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. We continue to still have very high COVID activity in our community. The 7-day average is now down to 400, but remember, 400 was the peak in the Delta surge more than a year ago. So it's still a lot of virus in our community, but we haven't seen hospitalizations increase with the increased case count. So, I think we're at a good place. Certainly I would encourage people who are not fully vaccinated, those who are eligible for a booster and haven't gotten it yet. I would strongly recommend that they do that. And Ryan, as you said, Congress did not provide any additional funds to the Biden administration to support the COVID pandemic moving forward. So you're going to begin to see us move back to the normal where, health services and tests and treatments are provided through your health insurer. So we will begin to see treatments like monoclonal antibodies will be one of the first things that will be stopped being funded by the federal government, which means that you would have to go to your physician. He would make a decision about whether it's recommended, and it would be a copay may be involved if that's what the case is. We've been acquiring tests, rapid antigen tests, and more than 2 million over the last couple months, and have distributed it to all the counties so that testing can be available, and the public school system. So hopefully, if someone suspects or shows up symptomatic, we can test them right away and get the results and be able to isolate. But really looking forward to in-person learning in the public schools. The university should be back to in-person learning on all those campuses. I know that we're seeing students choosing to do virtual learning and virtual classes. And certainly, I think in the next few months, it'll be an adjustment period again to learning to live with COVID.
And part of that learning to live with COVID was the Department of the DOE deciding that they would not mandate masks in the classroom. What are your thoughts on that decision? Are you concerned? School's been in session for about 2 weeks now. So presumably when we talked to Dr. Sarah Kimball, she did expect an uptick, but they were hoping that it would be manageable. How do you feel about that decision to get rid of mandatory masking in schools?
I do believe it was the right decision, Yanji. The CDC, and I know that Dr. Kimball and Dr. Char was in constant contact with CDC, working through and talking about school guidance. The CDC was headed in that direction, making masking voluntary or discretionary. Just want to remind everyone that principals and schools may be requiring masks for certain situations, especially if there's a case or if they see a number of cases on a school campus. Depending on what the situation is, we may find it necessary to have a mask requirement for periods of time or for different activities. But overall, masking will be discretionary this next school year.
I want to stay on this topic of health as we, continue to have these conversations about COVID-19. Of course, also monkeypox in the community as well. But just when we're talking about the overall resources available to the Department of Health, when you look at this department and all that they've had to deal with COVID-19, now with monkeypox, they're also involved in the red health situation, on top of all the daily other things that they are responsible for doing in terms of checks for restaurants. There is a lot that's required of this department. And we spoke to former director Bruce Anderson, who shared some concerns just with overall funding and just the amount that is being asked of the department and how thinly stretched they are. Do you believe that there should be maybe more funding for the Department of Health? Would that be something that you would recommend re-looking at with the overall demand of this department?
Yeah, certainly, Ryan. We have been dealing with infectious diseases for a while. As you know, we've had a couple of incidents with SARS and MERS in the past. That Hawaii does have a pretty robust surveillance system that alerted us, but clearly nothing that we were prepared for a statewide and actually global pandemic with an infectious disease. So we are making investments in the state lab to make improvements. I just talked with Dr. Char, and she just finished a big grant to the CDC and the federal government for improving the basic health response. So it would be positions and labs and other kinds of facilities to be able to better respond in a public health emergency. We are evaluating, Ryan, as you know, sometimes the state salaries just don't allow us to attract the people that we need. We're making assessments of that and appropriate salary levels. We continue to see people who desire careers in public service and public health. And I think that helps us. If you look at all of the key players in the Department of Health, they really stepped up and went beyond the call to keep our community safe. And we are looking at how we can expand staffing, look at a certain base level of public health professionals that we know that will become necessary. And I think we learned with contact tracers and other kinds of very skilled people that we can stand up training programs and train people to help us support the activity that's necessary. So, I do recognize that there's a lot more work that needs to be done, Ryan, but at least we've identified the pieces and we are making progress. This federal grant, if we are successful in competing and winning, will really help us a lot. It would be a huge shot in the arm and really allow us to accelerate supporting the department in the way that needs to happen.
Let's talk about one of the things that the department is dealing with, and that's what Ryan referenced just a minute ago, monkeypox. How are you feeling about the state's response to that? I know that nationally there are concerns when universities go back into session about intimate contact between students and perhaps an uptick in cases in that regard. So how do you feel about the state's response overall? Are you doing anything specifically with the university to try to prevent the spread of this disease?
Yeah, Yunji, we are really working to get more vaccines. It's a very limited supply. Once again, there's really no emergency funds available. And so the CDC is having to live within their current budget. We are taking the vaccine that's being made available to the state and having targeted vaccination clinics. And I definitely will be talking with Libby about vaccinations up at the university. But we're trying to identify organizations and advocacy groups that deal with those that are most at risk for monkeypox. We're trying to, again, stand up free vaccination clinics and encouraging those who may be at risk to get vaccinated.
Speaking of some of the federal dollars that you were alluding to earlier in some of your responses, of course, President Biden signing that Inflation Reduction Act into law, which of course targets specifically areas of climate change as well as the infrastructure in the various states. How will Hawaii benefit from the signing of this act and this law and this bill? And what are some of the things that you think could directly be impacted here in Hawaii?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. As you know, Hawaii has been a worldwide leader in fighting climate change and taking high impact action to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions and capture more carbon than we emit. We find it really helpful. They're extending a number of tax credits for green energy projects that both residential customers as well as businesses would be able to take advantage of. The big benefit is that they are really supporting green energy through tax credits and infrastructure dollars that will be helpful. Building out the EV charging station and managing the transition to green transportation is the next big focus in our community. We've been looking at electric vehicles for inter-island travel, and there probably are some provisions that would help with investments and accelerating some of that efforts. And then overall, being able to be assured of federal tax credits and knowing that there will be other federal dollars available for green infrastructure really does help us accelerate our efforts here in the islands.
Let's talk a little bit about Red Hill. We know that the Navy had released their timeline, and you had said that that is too long to do, 2.5 years approximately to drain those tanks. What have those conversations been like in recent weeks? Where do we stand on this, and sort of just a status update, if you will, on draining those tanks and where we stand with the Navy on their timeline?
Yeah, Yunji, really the plan that they had provided us really just doesn't provide enough detail for us to really evaluate and determine whether it can be accelerated. So we are waiting for a more detailed defueling plan. We've asked that they identify specific projects that they believe need to be implemented to reduce the risk. As you know, the most recent information regarding the May fuel leak exposed the fact that there were many alarms going off in the system that triggered or that announced that fuel was being leaked, and none of that was really shared with anyone, and that's always a concern. So we continue to push them for a detailed plan. We want them to identify the specific projects that they believe need to occur and be implemented prior to defueling. And we want to double check their work because we don't want to move the fuel around and trigger another failure or a leak of the system that has been clearly shown to be in much needed repair and to a much greater extent than has ever been disclosed prior.
In sticking on this topic, when the conversations with the military and these officials who are leading the charge, how open are they to the state's involvement? So say, as you said, we want to double check their work. Would they allow state engineers or other officials to visit the facility if need be? I'm just, wondering about how transparent they are now, knowing that there have been some of these things that have been kind of swept under the rug or not revealed. How much have things changed in the overall dynamics, and are they willing to partner with the state in a more transparent way?
Ryan, on the working level, there has been increased transparency. So we have been able to get access to the physical facility we may not be directly involved in all the conversations with the consultants that they're hiring, although they have improved in that area as well. Ryan, we just continue to want to make sure that that we understand exactly what investments they're making. We understand what risk they would be involved as they try and move the fuel around and begin to defuel the tanks. We want to make sure that they take precautions should there be another accident, that they can respond to and stop the activity right away. And we just want to make sure that we feel confident that all the appropriate investments and actions and corrections are implemented prior to moving the fuel, because we do know that moving the fuel in any direction poses a significant risk to our community.
A lot of the focus has been on the primary election and now looking ahead to the general, but you still have several more months in office where a lot can be done. What would you say are your top 2 or 3 priorities in these final months as you wind down and, prepare to transfer power to the next administration?
Yeah, certainly, Yunji. Right now, we are really focused on your tax rebates. We are working to get them out as soon as possible. Our Department of Tax is working with other agencies to get that to happen. So we'll be having an announcement on when the general public can expect to receive checks and rebates directly deposited for those who had refunds directly deposited. And beyond that, there are a couple of projects that we are really focused on finishing strong. We just started a few tech projects. The financial management system for the state is more than 40 years old. Another disaster waiting to happen, and we've initiated that project, and trying to change out that financial system touches all of the state agencies except for the University of Hawaii and the Department of Education. That's a real complicated project, but we've had success with tax modernization and others. So we really feel that we're at a good place and have the right team in place to move that forward. And then we are focused really on the federal grants, and especially the competitive grants that are part of the infrastructure Build Back Better bill. And as Ryan had mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act has competitive grants that we want to make sure that we are submitting high quality grant proposals for that. The administration has recognized that equity needs to be a bigger part of the evaluation of grants. And we all know that Hawaii is the only state that's all minority. And virtually every project that we do improves access for minorities and underrepresented groups. So we really feel well positioned to get more than our fair share of those federal competitive grants, just because of our communities, and we are focused to get those grant applications done.
I also just want to get your take on some of the things that have been coming up during the election. During these times, we hear a lot of proposals happening. We've heard about a travel tax that could be added to visitors that are coming in to help with, just like an eco fee, if you will. We've heard calls for reduction in other taxes for those who fall under certain criteria. I mean, there's just a lot of proposals that often get floated during an election season. As someone who has led in this office for the past 8 years, how hard is it to get some of these proposals that many politicians across all of the different seats that are running, how hard is it to actually get those things implemented? I mean, what are the steps in order to get that done? Because I think oftentimes voters will hear these things and then they kind of sizzle out. If you can explain the complexities that are maybe involved in trying to implement some of these large changes that we hear about.
Yeah, Ryan, it really, as a candidate, I think campaigns are really good for our community because it challenges all of the candidates to think about the most pressing issues and offer their solutions. You know, oftentimes the solutions offered are too simplistic and really doesn't incorporate all of the different aspects of issues. So it would be exciting to see how that plays out. You know, Ryan, and I'll just use an example. I did not know very much about housing development when I became governor. I heard that it was a big, huge issue in our community, and once I became governor, it was obvious that I needed to learn more about it. I convened a task force of advocates and those interested and involved with affordable housing. You know, and I'm proud that in my term, we will complete more than 13,000 housing units, and more than 8,000 of them will be affordable, targeted at 30 to 60% of the area median income, which is a lot more affordable housing than has been done in a long, long time. I'm hoping that whoever becomes the next governor can just continue the programs, because certainly we've done a lot of work to understand what the issues are, and you know, we are able to generate more than 1,000 affordable units every year. I do think that some of the candidates are once they become elected, find that it's a lot more complicated than they thought it was, and you know, and people struggle.
Can we ask you what's next for you personally and professionally? I know when we've asked you before on this program, you said that you'd like to travel for leisure as opposed to work. So we expect that. But where can we see you? You know, what are your professional ambitions beyond this? Obviously, you're still young, but you've ascended to the highest office in the state politically. So what's next?
You know, Yanji, I really don't have any specific plans. I do know that I want to get healthy. I want to, you know, be able to exercise and lose a few pounds, get back to running on a more regular basis, because I do know that I want to be able to be in good health so I can enjoy the next phase. I don't really have any specific plans at this point. I'm going to take a couple weeks off and visit my kids. And then really look at the opportunities that are before me, and sort through and think about. You know, I've talked with many people who've retired, and they say the greatest thing about being retired is that you can do the things you really want to do instead of the things you have to do. So I'm looking forward to being able to do that.
Well, I would suggest that you maybe look into writing a book, because when you look at the past 8 years, you've had a lot of things that have happened during your time in your administration. So that would be a very interesting read with all the things that you've had to deal with over the past 8 years. Just
Well,
a suggestion.
yeah, well, you know how that goes, Ryan. I that has many people have asked me about that. I don't know. You know, that's a lot of work. So we'll have to see how that goes.
All right, Governor David Ige, thank you so much for spending your time with us on this Wednesday morning and updating us on some of the things that are happening here around the state. We always enjoy talking to you and look forward to our next conversation. Mahalo.
Aloha.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well, good to hear from him. We covered a wide range of topics. If you missed any of it, of course, you can go back and watch from the beginning when this live stream is finished, or listen to the podcast later this afternoon. Interesting to hear his thoughts on COVID. He does say that we still have quite a bit of virus in our community, but that said, we are transitioning to that phase of learning to live with COVID. Part of that, of course, is no mandatory masking in any circumstance, even in the schools. He did caution, though, of course, that certain principals and certain complexes may decide to require masking on a temporary basis if it is warranted. But really hearing a lot about what he plans to focus on in the next few months. And a lot of that is making sure that federal funding continues to flow into Hawaii.
Yeah, we heard a lot of that in this conversation with him, talking about the Infrastructure Reduction Act that was signed by President Biden, ensuring that Hawaii gets its fair share, looking for ways to continue to find federal dollars to support some of the programs. He also talked about federal dollars and a grant that could potentially help boost the Department of Health in dealing with all the things that they continue to have to navigate through the pandemic, through monkeypox, through Red Hill. There's a bunch of things that are being asked of the Department of Health, and he's saying that hopefully the department will receive this grant that will help provide more funding for the department. But he also talked about looking at ways to help to increase the salary for state employees. That is something that they will continue to examine, knowing that oftentimes it's hard to be competitive with the private sector when the state can only offer a certain amount in terms of a threshold with salaries, and the governor looking for ways to help incentivize some of that through higher funding for some of these positions that will attract what would be more qualified and maybe more experienced people into these positions.
We also got his thoughts on Saturday's election results. He spoke highly of his lieutenant governor, saying that he was a hard worker and sort of highlighting some of his experiences legislatively in the past, and also speaking highly of Sylvia Luke and saying that she would bring a lot to the lieutenant governor's office as well. He noted that he didn't see a lot of surprising results on Saturday night, which is something that we've heard from political analysts as well, but just interesting to get his take. And also what he plans to do next. Sounds like he's not quite ready to write that book, but he does want to have some leisure time and also some time for exercise.
Yeah, and knock on wood, when you think about his administration overall, I mean, he's had to deal with a lot, from lava flows to, of course, the pandemic. I mean, this may seem like a leisure time for the governor, right? Knock on wood that nothing comes up. But, a time for the governor, as he said, to really implement some of the things, the final things that he would like to do as part of leaving a legacy on how he ends this administration. But always great talking to the governor. We'll speak to him again later next month.
That's right. Coming up on Friday, we're going to be shifting the focus to tourism. A real bellwether for the state, of course, is how many flights are coming in and out and how full they are. To get an insight on that, we'll be talking to Peter Ingram, CEO of Hawaiian Airlines. He always shares so much information. We love having him on and really charting the course of the pandemic with him. There was one point where he came on and said that the airline was losing $3.5 million a day, really at the height of things. So how is the airline doing financially now? What new routes are planned? What routes are going away? We're going to speak about all of that right here on Friday with Peter Ingram. So do join us then at 10:30.
We'll see you then. Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Long's Drugs.